Well, today I get a chance to talk about King David. In the Bible study, we talked about some scriptures. We went through a bunch of scriptures. We had reference to a bunch of scriptures. Now I'd like to talk about, because the first sermon was about prophecy, the Bible study was about prophecies about King David. This sermon is about two lessons from King David. So let's go over to 1 Samuel chapter 24. Two lessons from King David. So again, the first Bible study went through a lot of just information about what the history of King David was and some of the prophecies and how they pointed to Christ. Now this one's more of a Christian living approach as I give in the sermon today. And want to talk about some lessons, which again we tried to show in the Bible study how you use the Old Testament as foundational springboard to concepts in the New Testament. And I think that's very important to know. But this sermon helps us realize that we can learn valuable lessons from the Old Testament. In the midst of all this history and all this information, there are nuggets in here, valuable information. Now again, we could have all sorts of lessons from King David. Many, many lessons we could have. I've just picked two today. The first lesson I want us to learn from King David is how he dealt with King Saul. How he dealt with King Saul. It's an amazing story. And being an amazing story, people have drawn conclusions. I know Church of God people, but not just Church of God people, have drawn conclusions that are really turned out to be a wrong application of the message. And I'll mention it briefly in passing, but I want to focus on what the message really is. In dealing with King Saul, in 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 6, here was David. Of course, David was a man of war who shed much blood. In fact, that was the reason why he was not allowed to build the temple. He wanted to build the temple. He had a good idea about building the temple, but because he was such a man, considered a man of war, identified as a man of war, he was not allowed to get that job done. So even though he was a man of war, I mention that because he was a fighter. Man, this guy was a fighter, and he was tough. If you remember, he went into battle, and he would be so victorious that the mobs would love him. They would just love him. So this tough man of war chose to turn the other cheek. I point this out because at times when you make choices that sometimes people will think you're afraid. You don't do something, they'll think you're afraid. And your answer is you're not afraid at all. You're just trying to be either kind or obedient, or you're trying to follow a code. You're trying to follow a way of life. But again, people say, oh, you didn't stand up to that person. You were afraid. Now you're starting to see the applications that can apply. Applications on jobs, applications in congregations when you don't have a sweet pastor who lets you do what you want to do. I'm easy on you guys, but I don't try to run your lives. I don't try to control you, which is, you like. That's why you're here, because you don't want to be in a place where people try to control you. I don't either, by the way. But some people in congregations, maybe some people listening in, maybe they actually, where they normally go to church, the church tries to control them, or maybe the council members try to, or different people try to control. When you make choices, maybe even a choice to step back, or a choice not to retaliate, it's not because you're afraid. This David, this man of war wasn't afraid of Saul, but he was afraid of his conscience. He was afraid of what he thought that God would want of him. 1 Samuel 24, verse 6. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." See, that the Lord's anointed, that can be used as, could it be applied to anyone? People can apply that in many ways. David chose, he said, I am not going to touch him. But David, you're a man of war, you could kill him. I'm not going to do it. Chapter 26, verse 11. Chapter 26, verse 11. The Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But please take now the spear and the jug of water that are by his head and let us go. And actually what he did was he left a message. In other words, he took some things to let you know, I could have hurt you. I could have hurt you badly. Later on, he regrets that. like, why did I even do that? I just should have gotten out of there. But because he was human. David was human. He was very human, the same emotions we have. And it's like letting him know, I could have hurt you. I could have hurt you badly. And he took that stuff, and then he later on said, why did I do that? I should just have left it alone. And I tell you, there are times you stand up for yourself. The book of Ecclesiastes says there's a time to speak up, a time to be quiet. There's a time and place for all sorts of things. And there is a time to address. There's a time to defend yourself. There's a time to stand up. But there's also times to sit back. When you choose to sit back, you have to realize you can be just like King David and not promote yourself. Let me just quickly mention here, let's look over at chapter 18. Let's get some background real quickly. Chapter 18, verses 5 through 9. David went out whenever Saul sent him and behaved wisely, and Saul set him over men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of the people and in the sight of Saul's servants. It happened as they were coming in, and David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of the cities in Israel. They were singing, dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines and joy and musical instruments. And the women sang as they danced, Saul has slain his thousands, David has slain his 10,000s. Okay, that's a problem right there. Saul is going to be jealous. I'm in charge, Saul said. And he came out and he saw these women singing. He's like, oh, they're happy to see we won the battle. And the lady sang, Saul has slain his thousands. He's thinking, yes, they recognize my abilities as a leader. They recognize my abilities as a soldier. But they kept on singing and said that David slayed the 10,000s. And Saul's thinking, wait a minute. He's getting more recognition than I am. He's getting more congratulations than I am. And he didn't like it. He didn't like it so much that he became angry about it. Verse 10. It happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand as he had other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand. You know, the evil spirit was bothering Saul, according to the story. The music would help calm the spirit down, which I would say you might want to consider what kind of music you're listening to. I'm not going to make any proclamations. I'm not going to make any statements of what music's good, what music's bad. But I will say from this biblical message, consider what kind of music you're listening to, because it can influence your mood, it can influence the environment, it can influence the atmosphere. And you don't want something that's going to cause you to lose your perspective, lose your concentration. You don't want to lose your sanity. You don't want to open the door being tired, being sick, being exhausted, and all of a sudden letting music be a bad thing. Anyway, let music be a tool for you. But here, Saul cast the spear, and he said, I will pin David to the wall with it. And David escaped his presence twice. Now, David was probably quite a soldier, quite adept at dealing with spears and dealing with people trying to hurt him. But, probably the first time it was thrown at him, he probably wondered, what's going on here? But Saul tried it a second time. And then David realized, I think I'm getting out of here. I'm getting out of here. So in this life, are there people who throw spears at you? Well, maybe not literal instruments. Are there people who try to hurt you? Are there people who slander you? Are there people who tell false things about you? Are there people who, whatever, however you want to portray this, someone throwing spears at you, and yet you're like David, you say, well, I'm not afraid of anyone, but yet you might want to get out of danger. Getting out of danger is pretty smart, actually. That's why there are actually some times when people leave marriages. There's some people in marriages where they're in physical danger. They have to leave a marriage. And I know the Bible is hoping that all marriages can last forever. And I hope all marriages can last forever, but I know there are some situations where people need to get out of something, need to get away from something. Of course, those should be the exception, not the rule. Those should not be just over a little hangnail. Those should be something where it's really dangerous and something really bad happening. And there are certain jobs you want to get away from a job. Some jobs are just toxic. You want to get away from it. So the principle is You don't kill your boss, or you don't kill your spouse, you get away from it. So in other words, you don't want to do the wrong thing, and that's how I would apply it for today. In fact, there were times, and at times I've been more negative about my country than I am today. I still critique it, I still analyze it, but I had gotten to the place with my country, the United States of America, that I said, I cannot allow myself to be bitter about this. I cannot allow it to consume my life. I will still analyze it, I will still look at it, but the question I ask myself is, do I want to go somewhere else? And my conclusion was, no, I did not want to go somewhere else. Did I want to go to Costa Rica? Did I want to go to Australia? Did I want to go to Canada? And it was a real simple question. I didn't even entertain those thoughts. I just heard people go here, people go there, and I thought, is that what I want? I would rather get away from the situation than to do something that I felt was immoral or wrong. Unfortunately, as things are hitting the streets today in our country, people are doing things they're overstepping bounds, and sooner or later, unless things turn around, and there's a lot of people praying about it, a lot of people hoping for good things, wishing good things, praying for good things, and maybe good things can come, but sooner or later it can get tough. It can get to the point where you may have to make some decisions to defend yourself. You may have to make some decisions. How would you defend you? What is your view of self-defense? I haven't done it so much recently, but there have been times when I've traveled, I've encouraged people I've asked in an interactive Bible study, I've asked people, what is your view of self-defense? And I would tell them, you all don't have to have the same view of self-defense, but what is your view of self-defense? And what is your view in your family? Are you and your wife on the same page? Are you and your family on the same page? But I think people need to analyze it, because all of us are asking God never allow something to occur, but there may come a day something occurs if our country turns into the way it was in the early New Testament church when they were under occupation. We've just not been under occupation. Some of our brethren around the world are under occupation. We've never been under it. We have other forms of bondage creeping in on us. In some ways, they're more subtle forms of bondage, and we don't like it because we have had so much freedom. We don't like any form of bondage. And some of the brethren around the world would say, you're worried about that? Do you know what they would say, do you know what I have to deal with every week? Do you know what I've had to deal with my entire life? But see, we've experienced a certain thing. We've come to expect a certain thing. We've had certain expectations. And whenever your expectations aren't met, that's when we get disappointed. And so some of our expectations are not being met. And there's at least a verbal civil war going on, and we hope it doesn't get to the worst parts of it. Who knows what's going to happen? But you have to make certain choices. Now, when you make those choices, is the story of David and King Saul going to come into play? Are you at least going to be aware of the story and decide what you're going to do about it? Anyway, I won't go through the whole story about it, but here was a time after King Saul was chasing David. David was hiding in caves. There's some psalms, some of the beautiful psalms. If you look at the beginning of the psalm, sometimes it'll say, this psalm was written under such and such a time. And one of the psalms was written when he was in a cave hiding from Saul. There's a manhunt after him. And he writes one of these beautiful psalms. And maybe Mr. Botha will cover some of that when he goes through the book of the Psalms. And again, maybe sometime we can go through, or maybe I'll go do a series weeks and months from now and go through some of those to say, again, the circumstance of how the song was written, what was happening in the life when that was occurring. But anyway, what happened was, going back to chapter 24, verse 1, it happened when Saul had returned from following the Philistines that it was told, saying, take note, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. And Saul took 3,000 chosen men of Israel, went to seek him, and his men at the rocks of the wild goats. And he went to the sheepfold by the road where there was a cave. And Saul went in to attend to it at his needs. He went to go to the bathroom. And standing in the corner where he couldn't be seen was the men of David. Verse 4, this is the day which the Eternal has said to you, behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you. But David arose and cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Again, people analyze. Last week I talked about God's will. We talked about God's will in the interactive Bible study. And as I said, my view of the whole concept of faith, one of the great fallacies of faith is people don't take in the concept of God's will involved with healing. And so thereby people draw conclusions based on, to me, physical factors. But anyway, they could have said, this is God's will. It's happening, so God's delivered you here. Take him out. He's out to get you. Take him out now. Well, David cut off the skirt so that way Saul could know, whoa, he had me. He had me dead to rights. He could have done it. And then chapter 26, which I read earlier from, verse 5. David arose, came to the place where Saul had encamped. The first one was in a cave. This was at a camp. I don't know if they had been drinking or they were sleeping soundly, or these guys were the swamp fox. They could really get around in their moccasins and they can sneak up on people, because they went into the camp, and David saw the place where Saul lay, and Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of the army. Saul laid within the camp, and the people were all around him. These guys are sneaking in quietly. And David answered, who'll go down and do this? And Abishai said, I'll do it. Verse 7. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and Saul lay sleeping within the camp, and his spear stuck in the ground. And Abner and the people lay all around him. Abishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Please let me strike him. I will kill him with one. I won't wound him. I know how to go into the heart and twist the spear. I know how to do this. Let me do this. David, your hands will be clean. You don't even have to be the one doing it. I'll do it for you. And David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Okay, so Saul deserved it. So this comes into play for you and for you and me. People deserve punishment. They deserve consequences for how they've dealt with you. That's life. Probably the times we deserve consequences for how we do with others. That's also life. We don't want that to be the case. We don't want to be the one sinning. We don't want to be the one hurting other people. But there'll come times in your life when you are being mistreated, and you have to decide what are you going to do about it. And you'll have to decide, are you going to stand up and do something? Are you going to stand up and complain through the system? Or what are you going to do? I just want you to consider these stories here. When the person who's hurting you deserves to die, are you going to be the one to do it? Or are you going to say, no, I'm going to learn from David's example, and I'm going to let it be in God's hands, and I'm not going to do it? Not because you're a coward, not because you're afraid. You're going to have to make those calls, by the way. People will make different choices on that. Now, again, here's where the church made a mistake years ago. Or not. Some of the Church of God did this. Some of the churches of God still do this. They will identify a certain leader as God's anointed, and thereby they will say you have to give your total alliance and allegiance to them. An example would be, which this is not what we do here, and this is why you like it here. Some pastors would say the pastor is God's anointed, and you better not raise your hand against God's anointed. Well, I'm glad you don't kill me. That's a good thing. I'm really glad you don't do that. But on the other hand, I don't place myself as God's anointed over you. Now, you know that, but trust me, friends, you have friends and family who go to churches. They will view the clergy and the leaders as God's anointed over them. And that's not what this message is about. God's anointed is not about certain special clergy. That's not what it's about. God's anointed would be anybody who's on this planet Earth who God is a part of life. You don't want to be taking wrong actions against anybody. And I hope you'll remember that. Again, there are times to stand up. Again, real quickly, when I had my heart surgery, again, I wanted to be the best patient in the world. I wanted to get out fast. I didn't want a staph infection. Everything was good. We wanted to be the best patient in the whole world. And we were well treated because I didn't preach at the doctors and nurses. I didn't tell them about natural healings. I wanted to be a good patient. First night we had the best nurse there. She was our head nurse, and she was great. My wife couldn't be with me the first night. The second night, Pam could be in with me. So Pam was in with me the last nights I was there. And we had a horrible nurse. And the head nurse said to my wife, she's not experienced in heart. She's a floater. She's either over with nerves, cancer, whatever. She doesn't know about hearts at all. That's not her specialty. But she was floating, so they gave her to me. Okay, and she said, "Don't worry, I'm watching your husband's monitor all night long," which made my wife feel really good. Well, this nurse was really bad, and I mean, she didn't know how to move me. I had tubes in me. She didn't know how to move me. Anyway, I don't want to go through all the details. The point was, Pam and I, we did say we don't want her anymore. You know, she's doing the best she can, but we don't want her anymore. So we did complain, but we didn't get mad. We didn't throw a fit. Didn't throw a spear at anybody. You know, we didn't swear. We didn't curse. We were very polite, and it was not a problem. The girl was doing the best she knew how to do. But it was, again, even when we had a challenge, we wanted to handle it professionally. We wanted to handle it like a Christian. We wanted to handle it politely. And we were able to do it. But actually, we looked at it as a good thing because we wanted to handle everything the hospital threw at us, or what was allowed to happen, and we wanted to handle it right. And so you have things like that too. You'll have situations where you have to make choices of how you're going to handle things. And so to me, it's like, I don't want to raise my hand against God's anointed. I don't want to kill her. Yes, we did ask that she not work with me anymore, and she didn't. But again, so she's God's anointed in that she was the nurse. She wasn't a special church leader. She was the nurse. And, you know, again, how this could apply to the nation. Because people have different views of Barack Obama and Donald Trump, usually conflicting views of those two people. If you view Barack Obama as God's anointed, or you view Donald Trump as God's anointed, be really careful about how you deal with the mistakes you think they make. Obviously, don't get caught up in all the swirl that goes on around us. Don't get caught up in all the anger. Don't get so caught up in the attitude. Be alert to what's going on. See what's going on. Be wise about what's going on. But be really careful. Just treat them as, you might say, well, you think one's more God's anointed than the other. They're in a position. So honor the position, even if you can't honor the man. Or whether it be McConnell or Pelosi. They're people in positions. So again, you can disagree with them. You can work within the system, but you have to make sure you don't get caught up in attitudes that are not reflecting the way of God. You can be like David. I mean, because right now, McConnell, Pelosi, Trump, or Obama, none of them are throwing spears at you. They may be making decisions that are hurting you. They may be making decisions that irritate you. But again, look at the way David dealt with it, and as you see how he dealt with it, try to handle it in a proper way. Well, that's only the first lesson from David. The second lesson is how he dealt with personal sin. How he dealt with personal sin. And I'm going to honor my commitment here of not going over time. So I'm going to say this. David can do something that Jesus Christ, the example of David could do something the example of Jesus Christ could not do. Jesus Christ could not show us how to deal with sin because he never did. So Jesus Christ is our ultimate role model, and we should have him as our ultimate role model. But you can learn something about David who made some pretty serious mistakes, and how he dealt with them, how he came to acknowledge them. It'd be good to read Psalm 51, because that's a psalm of repentance when he was going through his personal sins. And I'm sorry that I didn't organize this better to spend more time talking about it. But I'm going to trust that you like to read your Bible. I'm going to trust that you know the story. And I'm going to trust that you'll take the time to review David's mistakes and how he came to deal with it. So in this sermon today, I wanted to help you look at some of the lessons from David. Look back at how he dealt with King Saul. Look at how he dealt with that situation, because you may have similar situations arise in your life. And I know you're going to have sin in your life because you're like me, we all sin. So I want you to consider the example of King David, and maybe he can help you to deal with your personal sin. But I hope you can take those two lessons home, and I hope they can help you through this week.